Good evening. Well, I had an impulse today on this 71-degree day right now, and it went higher than that. And the impulse was to go to Harpers Ferry and to see what an earlier insurrectionist did. And his focus was, of course, slavery. And I've been over there, and I thought I would walk and talk over there. But what happened was they canceled out one of the roads, and so I ended up on a merry jaunt through the area and came upon John Brown's farmhouse, from whence they struck out to seize the armory at Harpers Ferry, which invited the Union troops to come after them. And General Robert E. Lee, I don't know if he was a general then, was in charge of the group of soldiers. And I've always been struck, looking at the scene, how both poets and prose writers have described when some of John Brown's men were set upon by the Union soldiers, then just the U.S. soldiers, that they tried to scamper across the river, which is shallow today at those points and was then. And because they did that, when they were shot, and as the siege went on for hours, what they did was they would occasionally, because of the boredom, just go and shoot one of John Brown's men who were in the waters at Harpers Ferry. Ultimately, John Brown was taken into custody, and they tried him while they were building the place where they would hang him. And the story is interesting because John Brown believed that the slaves would come up and throw off their bonds and join the movement, but they didn't. But what happened, some say, was that Southerners became so nervous that they were going to lose their slaves that they decided to make a preemptive strike, and that led to their resisting the Union, if you will. So it's interesting. And it's interesting how we dealt with it at the time. You know, of course, there is the factor of Lee as well. So I was thinking of that today and how we resolved with great difficulty the race question as it applied to slavery, with lost lives and many people still unbowed as to whether they were right or not in the South today. And I see it in Virginia. So this is no small thing. And so when the King and Queen of Great Britain are coronated together, all I can think of is to say, not my king. And no president from the United States has ever gone to a coronation. Now, we have sent delegations, and indeed with this one, Jill Biden went over, but not our president. Biden did not himself go. And I think it's interesting that hanging in the shadows, eager to be invited, who was in Scotland, was Trump. And it didn't happen. And it's interesting, this little dalliance with a royal invitation, which is also tasteless, but there, you know, what else? There goes Trump, so what do we expect? So he also gave up, if you will, the challenge to deal with his own civil charge that he had raped someone and then he had defamed them. So it's very interesting how thin is the judgment of this man who thinks himself a special genius. I'm hopeful that this week, after the concluding remarks of Ms. Carroll's counsel and Tacopina, that we'll have a decision for her. If we don't, if Tacopino's method of cross-examination and bullying appears to work, I think that's a sad day for, well, the justice system, civil justice system in this case. Because if the people cannot discern that in a way Tacopina stood in the place of Trump, a bully, leaning on her, saying and presuming false statements that he asked her about, I think that we have another negative. On the other hand, should Trump be found guilty, it would be another step on the road to our republic. Because it would mean, and I say this as I'm taking a stand, but it would mean that justice matters. And that a guy who doesn't even show up, who's more interested in romancing the Brits to see if he can attend a coronation and try to steal the scene, which is lost on no one, just doesn't work. And that's the way it should be. This case was tried very carefully, and I say this at a distance, of course, and you always risk making an error when you're not in the courtroom yourself during the trial. Again, about Charles, going forward, what does this mean in terms of the relation between the states, the various nation states, ourselves included? And Charles, in a way, has given up his voice, meaning that before he was made a king officially today, he could speak to issues, and now he can't. He has to basically mimic the parliament. He has to adhere to the party in power, and that's going to limit, it seems to me, a man who had gifts that go beyond being called king. But there it is. The other thing that strikes me is Minnow. I don't know if you remember Newton Minnow. He said TV was a vast wasteland. And when you think about how much time is wasted on people sitting in front of that tube, gaining nothing in terms of insight and so forth, you have to think of it as a form of electronic opiate. It allows us to escape from some very serious things and some enjoyable ones. And yes, sure, we all watch good documentaries from time to time. We do learn things from it. But mostly it's not that at all. It's sort of like the people on a diet who eat
let's pull over here and watch it.
What is salty, full of fat, sweet, the things that help sell to Americans food that compromises their life. At every turn, we have our lives being compromised as part of these pitches. And so TV, in large part, is that. If you think of the shows we watched when we were younger, there's a lot of overacting, making faces and things like that. I have to say that I've seen some shows that are on TV, and I've seen some movies which the acting is amazing. And I do think that's worth watching. But see, that's my personal weakness, is movies, shows, dramatic shows, and really good TV. But I watch more than I should when I do. And, it's a way to let down, but we need less of that. We need more of action. When you think about the debt limit, we have a little problem there. And I agree with Biden that the money is due and owed, and we have to increase the debt limit and say so. How we handle our funds going forward, what we spend them on, the public funds, that's a subject for budgeting. It's not a subject for this. And in the past, we've talked about Article 14, Section 3 of the Constitution, that those who seek to overthrow our government can be barred from holding office. Well, I wish somebody had invoked that, but they haven't. But in that same article, there's a Section 4 that can be read to empower the president to increase the debt limit. And I suppose that's his little magic number if he chooses to do so. Now, I ended up walking in Brunswick on this marvelous trail by the canal, by the Potomac River. And it's a peaceful place, particularly this time of the day, when the bikes aren't here and the children aren't here. Not that I don't have any qualms about it. I often walk here when they're both here. But nothing is as quiet as the trail that I do by my place on the other side of the Potomac. I'm on the Maryland side of Brunswick. And looking back on this week, I think people need a break. They need a break from how serious the goings-on are that are going wrong on a daily basis. And I think we just have to keep throwing logs on the fire of revolt and reform and speak in the light of that fire about the reforms that we need and why. And it is because, not one of these trite statements, about, oh, this is the best government that anybody's ever found. The older you get, the more you know that any government is no better than the people who are in the positions of authority within that system. So is that to concede you could have a benevolent dictator? I suppose it is. It seems less likely because we always have Acton's rule that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so Trump fits in that camp, no question about it. Are there people in the middle, perhaps? Well, they're not evident today, not on the Republican side. And even Biden, who has sort of given space for Republicans as if they could engage in a constructive dialogue, as if they understand somehow what's necessary and they're just not doing it, out of fear or terror. And I think that's wrong. I think you have to take people at what is the most obvious conclusion. And that is that they're brutal, they don't care, they only want to win, they only want to please those on Wall Street, and they want to take some for themselves. It's an old story, politicians, I get for my people, but I also get for myself. Well, why shouldn't I? And that's a sad state of affairs. So we have to continue to talk up at every level when we get a Thomas or we have another senator or congressman doing something terrible on the Hill, or we see in the public arena bad things happening. Bad meaning often unlawful, harmful, irregular, sort of like guns and children. And that's what we do tomorrow or Monday. This is Saturday. And at this point, I don't know what happened in the races, but I am concerned, not just for the Derby, but for any race, that horses be treated better and that it be a sport rather than a mechanism for people to steal money by compromising and brutalizing these marvelous animals. And I don't have any trouble with racing. And I participated not in any racing, but I participated in shows, jumping over fences and things like that. And the horses were always pets to me. And I did race a few horses, but we didn't put anything in them and so forth. And it was inexpensive racing in Charlestown in West Virginia. And the people say that horse racing is the sport of kings. In my experience, it was the sport of veterinarians, because you got to watch those thin legs if you're racing them when they're young, and you have to be careful because they can bleed if they're not up to the task. And to me, these were signals that the horse should be allowed to, just stand in the field. And we had fields, and property was less expensive than a lot of other places out here in Loudoun County. And at one point, we had 70 acres, and now we have 10.3. And, you know, that's a lot of space as compared to my friends in New York who thought I must be a very wealthy gentleman farmer. Not so. The bank and I owned the land, and we paid a monthly amount, and when we sold it, you know. So you can do that here, but if you'd have to travel far away from my original stomping grounds in New York to find a place that could allow you that expanse of territory to allow horses to, you know, roam a pasture, be pets, touch them, let the stallions cover a mare, and have a foal or two. So horses are magnificent animals, and they may not be abused, and if they are, we'll kill the damn sport, because it's not a sport when that's what's happening. So I don't know if anyone was injured today. I hope not. We had 4 horses that died in this last week at Churchill Downs, and so that's not good. So I am literally in a tunnel of trees, and so I can say to you, I hope and expect to talk to you tomorrow, and so I say goodbye from my tunnel of trees in Maryland. Bye-bye.